Legion of Superheroes. This is gonna be tough.
First things off, I like the Legion. I really do. But the fact of the matter is, the Super Team's timeline has been tweaked, restored, restarted, rebooted, and downright twisted to the point that it has become a veritable Gordian knot.
In a nutshell, the Legion of Superheroes were a group of superpowered teenage aliens who formed after being inspired by the adventures of Superboy.
The group was almost immediately popular, with an ever-growing roster that would eventually include a time-traveling Superboy and Supergirl. And thanks to writers like Jim Shooter and Paul Levitz, alongside artists like Keith Giffen and Dave Cockrum, the book would eventually become DC Comics' most popular selling title.
And I don't mean it was just the most popular team book at DC. No, it was the most popular overall book at DC. It was bigger than Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Justice League. In fact, its only rival was another book of teenage superheroes, The New Teen Titans. And then the crisis happened.
Ah, yes, the Crisis on Infinite Earths. DC Comics' attempt to fix their continuity by rebooting the entire universe. And with that reboot came a lot of new edicts. One of the big ones? There had never been a Superboy.
Now, I should clarify. There was a Clark Kent who had superpowers when he was a boy. He just never had any official adventures under the name of Superboy. And because there was no Superboy, that meant no inspiration for the Legion.
The reboot wasn't exactly the only problem. The team's members were getting a little long in the tooth. Well, sort of. You see, the team had a rule. Once a member turned 18, they were no longer an official Legionnaire.
Now, while there were a few team members who had turned 18 and moved on from the group, a lot of the fan favorite characters just basically got stuck at the age 17 for a really, really long time. So long, in fact, they actually began to marry off and have children. In other words, they were really starting to stretch the definition of a teenage superhero.
So a reboot was in order, and with that reboot came an attempt to, for lack of a better term, gritty the team up a bit by changing some of the team members' names. Lightning Lad became Livewire. Shadow Lass became Umbra. Phantom Girl became Apparition, to name a few.
Admittedly, the post-1994 reboot incarnation of the Legion is the one I know the least about. What I can tell you is that in 2000, two writers named Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning came onto the book to finish off one volume of the series and then relaunch into the next volume with a new number one. Now, you may not be familiar with Abnett and Lanning's Legion of Superheroes work, but you might be familiar with another cosmic super team that the two have worked on. Ooka chaka, ooka, ooka, ooka chaka. And for the record, yeah, I know technically Jim Shooter created the Guardians of the Galaxy, but the team incarnation that was used in the movie was done by Abnett and Lanning. Now, at the end of Abnett and Lanning's first story arc, a ship containing several Legion of Superheroes members fell into a rift in the space-time continuum, and that is what sets the stage for today's story, Legion Lost.
Three beings try to make their way across space using a comet for cover. Sadly, they are discovered and two of them are taken out. The lone survivor, whose name's Shikari, flies into a nearby nebula in an attempt to escape and evade her pursuers, known as the Progeny. Inside the nebula, Shikari comes across a damaged spaceship. Making her way on board, she triggers a holographic message from Jean Hurrah, Legion of Superheroes member, Element Lad. He explains the situation. The Legion ship was thrown into a rift in the space-time continuum. Element Lad continues in further messages which take place over several days, or possibly even years. He put his fellow Legionnaires into suspended animation crystals when he discovered that the ship was somehow existing outside the known universe. The final message details Element Lad's last-ditch effort to at least get back into the universe. Unfortunately, he needed to be outside of the ship in order to try it. The message ends with Jan pleading for whoever discovers the ship to rescue his comrades. As Shikari discovers the suspended animation crystals containing the Legion members, she's jumped by two members of the Progeny. In the midst of the scuffle, the crystals begin to crack open. Before the Progeny can kill Shikari, they're interrupted by a blast of lightning. The Legion of Superheroes are back.
Okay, here's the Legion roll call for this story. We have the previously aforementioned Livewire, the telepathic Saturn Girl, Umbra, who can wield a Dark Force dimension as a weapon, a shapeshifter in Chameleon, Brainiac 5.1, who's a descendant of the Superman villain, Ultra Boy, who can rotate between three types of superpowers, flight, strength, and invulnerability, Kid Quantum, who can manipulate items on an atomic level, and Monstrous. She's a monster. I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
The progeny attack, but the Legion makes quick work of them. Afterwards, the team place a translation earplug on Shikari, and she begins to explain the situation to them. However, this is interrupted by Ultra Boy, who is flipping out over the loss of his wife, Apparition. It's then that Apparition appears. She had to phase out of her crystal and down to the lower decks, and thus missed the fight. The happy reunion is cut short by Brainiac, who points out that they have company.
I should point out that each issue of this story is from a different narratorial viewpoint. The first issue was Shikari, and the second issue is from Monstrous.
The progeny tractor the Legion ship onto theirs. As this happens, Saturn Girl brings the team together with a plan. Peacefully negotiate for supplies, or take them by force. The progeny aren't exactly much for talking, so the Legion begins to fight. Except there's a tiny problem with their flight rings.
The Legion ring is made of a metal called velurum, which actually enables each person who wears it the ability to fly, even though there are actually other members of the Legion who can fly without the rings.
The Legion begin making their way through the ship, that is until they come across a progeny recycling center. It turns out that the progeny exterminate other races in an attempt to purify the galaxy.
In other words, the progeny are Daleks. Yes, even though this came out 5 years before Doctor Who even returned to television screens, the Legion of Superheroes are fighting Daleks.
Monstrous begins to flip out at the sight of this as it reminds her of her home planet. There, she was the daughter of the ruling elite until she got caught in a dream bomb explosion. This caused her mutation, and it caused her family to disown her. Monstrous and Shikari stay behind to take out the recycling center, while Chameleon and Kid Quantum take out the ship's reactor. The other Legion make their way to the bridge and deliver a message to the progeny. Give the Legion what they need, or they will take it. The progeny say no, so the Legion take what they need. Afterwards, Brainiac uses some of the navigational equipment that they harvested from the progeny. The good news is, he can tell where they need to go. The bad news is, he still doesn't know exactly where they are.
Part 3 of the story is told from the viewpoint of Kid Quantum.
Shikari walks in on Kid Quantum as she talks to the holograms of Element Lad. Quantum tells Shikari her backstory and her real name, which is Jasmine. Jasmine, Jan, and a fellow Legionnaire named Drake Burroughs were working to close the rift when Drake fell in. Then the rift swallowed up the others.
Drake Burroughs is a being of pure energy who needs to be contained in a special suit in order to interact with the other Legion members. In this story, he is eventually given the code name of Wildfire.
The Legion ship arrives on the temporary homeworld of the Kauai, aka the Pathfinders, who are Shikari's people. The Legion warn the Kauai of the progeny's coming, and the Pathfinders make preparations to evacuate, though Shikari would actually rather stay and fight. While helping the Kauai to collect comet ice, Jasmine notices a small spark of something off in the distance. The Legion manage to collect the spark in a containment field. It's Drake, who returns to tangibility as Brainiac manipulates the containment field into a new suit. The celebration is short-lived, however, as the progeny fleet arrives. Shikari chooses to stay and fight with the Legion against the progeny. This enables the Kauai to flee, and the progeny are eventually knocked back by the Legion.
Apparition takes over narrating for Part 4 of the story.
While most of the team partakes in a training exercise, Livewire begins trying to set up a hydroponic garden in order to get the group some food. Apparition joins her husband, Ultra Boy, outside the ship, and the two begin working on an experimental jump drive that Brainiac has developed. Amongst other things. Apparition then goes to visit Umbra, who seems to be a bit on edge more than usual. Apparition wonders if Umbra has suffered any additional trauma from the Blight, but Umbra just kicks her out.
The Blight were the big villains of the previous story arc. They're techno-organic beings who compose mainly of machinery and rotting flesh. So in other words, they're Cybermen. Yeah, I never thought I'd make two Doctor Who references in one episode.
Brainiac prepares to test his jump drive, and it seems to work for a moment as they move 16 light years in just a few seconds. That is until they notice a large being bearing down on the ship. It turns out to be a colony of quantum parasites who are attracted to the energy the drive was giving off. Apparition phases through Wildfire in order to reach the lever to shut the drive off and expel the parasites. Brainiac decides to abandon any further use of the drive, and so Shikari volunteers to use their pathfinding abilities in order to find a way back to Earth.
Well, Shikari is from a race of beings called the Pathfinders. Anyway, part 5 of the story is narrated by Brainiac 5.
Brainiac is called to the bridge as the Legion have discovered a mysterious pyramid-like object floating in space. Shikari explains that her abilities led them here, and this could provide a way back to Earth. Brainy doesn't actually believe in Shikari's abilities, only things that he can logically plan out and explain. Still, Saturn Girl orders Brainiac to form a boarding party and explore the object. Brady selects Umbra, Wildfire, Shikari, and Chameleon. Upon entering the pyramid, Brainiac makes two discoveries. The pyramid seems to be constructed of hard light and scorch marks from progeny blasters. It's then that they bump into a lone progeny trooper. He says he's not after them. He's on the run from something called the Omniphagus. He explains that he was part of a group sent to cleanse the pyramid, and instead they freed the Omniphagus, which killed everybody but him. Brainiac asks the progeny to lead the group to where they encountered the Omniphagus. There, Brainy discovers a large interdimensional doorway that, if used properly, could get the Legion home. Brainiac begins scanning the door when the Omniphagus emerges and the group retreats. Brainy concludes that the pyramid is actually a prison meant to hold the Omniphagus. The Omniphagus fires a blast at Brainiac, but Wildfire moves to attack the creature. It's of little use. The creature then inhales the remaining progeny. Chameleon then tries shifting into another Omniphagus, but that doesn't work either. Finally, Brainy tells Umbra to attack the creature and knock it back into the doorway, even if that means losing the best chance to make it home. Umbra's attack starts to work, but it's up to Brainiac and Wildfire to deliver the final blow. Back on the Legion ship, Shikari apologizes to Brainy for her failure. Brainiac responds, he's sorry too, and returns to work.
Umbra takes over narratorial duties for part 6 of the story.
The Legion try to get some rest, except for Umbra. She's being terrorized by the darkness she once trusted for her powers. Meanwhile, Livewire has also been having problems sleeping, and he talks with Apparition about the fact that Saturn Girl has been growing more and more distant. Before any of this happened, Garth and Imra were practically engaged. Now, he's not so sure where he stands. Apparition assures him that Saturn Girl is trying to keep a straight head so that everyone else remains calm. There's really nothing to worry about. Livewire finds Saturn Girl awake, and the two begin talking. She points out that it's taking all of her power to keep everyone else calm. She's been reading everyone's minds and can't help it because they're all basically just screaming their thoughts out. It's then that she starts picking up Umbra's thoughts and fears. Saturn Girl tries to psychically calm Umbra down, only to be knocked out by a psychic backlash. Elsewhere, something explodes out of Umbra's room and attacks Kid Quantum and Wildfire. Umbra then gets on an escape pod and heads down to the planet below. Also, Apparition has mysteriously disappeared. The group splits 3 ways as Livewire and Brainiac care to the injured, while Ultra Boy and Monstrous head off after Umbra, believing Apparition to be with her. And Chameleon and Shikari try to take out the creature from Umbra's room. As Chameleon and Shikari engage the creature, Brainiac finds out that it's actually a manifestation of Umbra's fears that is combined with Saturn Girl's subconscious. Meanwhile, Ultra Boy and Monstrous arrive on the planet and discover a modern city. Umbra lands on the planet as well and is suddenly jumped by some type of hero.
The planet's champion is named Singularity, by the way. Also, Ultra Boy takes over narratorial duties for part 7.
Ultra Boy and Monstrous locate Umbra, who's in the midst of fighting Singularity. Ultra Boy immediately asks Umbra about the location of Apparition. She doesn't know or care. She came to the planet alone. Meanwhile, Monstrous tries to peacefully engage Singularity, and it doesn't really work. Back on the ship, Livewire tells Chameleon and Shikari to leave the combo monster alone, as it could hurt Saturn Girl and Umbra. While Chameleon does his best to calm the beast down, Brainiac begins building a machine to separate the two psyches. Back on the planet, Singularity goes after Ultra Boy. Joe switches to invulnerability mode and suddenly notices that the city has disappeared. Ultra Boy rushes back to the city in order to stop Umbra and Singularity from fighting, but it doesn't really help. Back on the ship, Apparition suddenly appears to help Chameleon. At this point, Brainiac and Livewire arrive and use a device that manages to ensnare the combo monster. Afterwards, they try to get word down to the planet, but are unable to get through. Back on the planet, Ultra Boy and Monstrous repeatedly try to break up the fight between Umbra and Singularity, and they keep failing. Ultra Boy again shifts into invulnerable mode, and again the city vanishes. Finally, the ship manages to get through and Joe is able to talk with Tinya. Apparition tells her husband that they need to get Umbra back on board the ship. Ultra Boy explains the difficulties in getting Umbra back. The other Legionnaires come to a difficult decision. They must land the ship on the planet, even if the stress is so much that it could damage the ship beyond repair and they will never get home. However, it's then that another ship arrives and docks with the Legion ship. The door opens up, and several new members of the Legion of Superheroes emerge.
Okay, we have another roll call here. Starting things off, we have Livewire's sister Spark, Leviathan, formerly Shrinking Violet, who can alter her size, the previously mentioned Element Lad, and Legion co-founder Cosmic Boy. Also, Chameleon takes over narrating duties for Part 8 of the story.
The newly reinforced Legion prepares to land their makeshift craft. As they do so, Cosmic Boy explains that Element Lad managed to find a way back through the rift to Earth. Brainiac, though, is having a hard time believing this. By any reason, years have passed, and yet none of the arriving Legionnaires have actually aged. The others tell Brainy to pay no mind. Back with Monstrous and Ultra Boy, he tries to explain to her what it is he sees in his invulnerable form. She doesn't see it, though. Singularity then arrives carrying an unconscious Umbra. He's followed by the rest of the Legion. The Legion takes the fight to Singularity, but he's more than able to stand their ground. Ultra Boy explains to Brainiac what it is that he sees in his invulnerable mode. Brainiac, Ultra Boy, and Chameleon then break away from the group to explore what could be causing this. Brainiac uses a computer to track down the psionic amplification, which leads the three to an abandoned building. Inside, they find a machine which Ultra Boy punches and the machine falls apart. So does the illusion. Singularity cries out as Brainiac explains things. Singularity was the champion of the planet Lorcus Prime. He did such a good job of protecting the Lorcans that all of the enemies gave up and Lorcus didn't need him anymore. So they took Singularity to an uninhabited world and created an illusion to keep him happy. Singularity rejects this notion and leaves the planet in a huff. The Legion return to their ship and prepare to restore the psyches of Saturn Girl and Umbra. Umbra is restored rather quickly, but Saturn Girl is putting up more of a resistance. So Brainiac injects her with a telepathic inhibitor. He then looks up at horror as Cosmic Boy and the other Legionnaires begin to fade away. It turns out they were psychic projections created from Saturn Girl. And then there's one last cry of horror from Ultra Boy, as Apparition was also one of these constructs. Saturn Girl comes to, and she's greeted by her outraged teammates. The Legion is more lost now than ever.
After a betrayal of the team, we now get the story from Saturn Girl's perspective in Part 9.
Imra reaches out to Garth to give him some news as he goes through the wreckage of his hydroponic farm. It couldn't handle the stress of the ship landing. Ironically enough, the only plant that survived isn't edible. He only planted it because it looked nice. Garth explains that he understood why Imra did what she did. He just doesn't understand why she didn't tell him. All of her effort to keep Ultra Boy happy left Livewire feeling neglected. Imra tells Garth that she's stepping down from leading the Legion, and now he is the one in charge. Afterwards, Saturn Girl comes across a fight training exercise with a few of the other Legionnaires. They're not very welcoming like now. She then bumps into Ultra Boy, who's even less cordial, and won't talk to her at all. Imra tries one more time to talk with Joe. She explains that she was afraid that he'd snap if he knew Tinya wasn't actually there. He only cared about her and not about his other team members. So she created the Tinya protection. It was only supposed to be temporary, but the longer it lasted, the harder it was to end. Now, Joe is left unsure about how he can function without his love. Imra says that she understands. She spent so much time trying to be Tinya that she began to feel the bond that Joe and Tinya had. Imra and Joe then begin kissing.
Yeah, it's okay, Joe. Your wife's on the other side of the galaxy, so technically it's not cheating. Imra, you on the other hand, your boyfriend's only on the other side of the ship, so you are cheating. And before a bunch of you jump on me for shaming Saturn Girl, I'm joking.
Wildfire arrives as Ultra Boy and Saturn Girl realize the mistake they just made, and he tells the others to get to the bridge. They arrive with the others to find themselves flying straight into a massive fleet of Progeny ships.
Part 10 of the story is from Wildfire's perspective.
Before the Legion can formulate any type of plan, Wildfire launches himself towards the Progeny fleet. Ultra Boy, Kid Quantum, and Shikiri join Wildfire in order to provide backup. They do manage to take out a few ships, but eventually the Progeny's numbers win out, and the four, along with the rest of the Legion, are taken hostage. The Progeny fit the Legion with restraining bolts and prepare to take them to the Progeny homeworld, known as the Rosette. There, the group will be taken to meet the Progenitor, the Progeny's leader and creator. The Progeny leave the room, and Brainy admits to disabling the restraints. He was bored. Though the Legion could make an escape attempt, they choose not to. The Progeny's numbers are too much in their favor, and they really want to meet the Progenitor. The Legion are taken to the Rosette, a ring of planetoids held together around a small star with a bridge. They are taken before the Progenitor, who reveals himself to be John Ara, Element Lad.
What a twist! Well, not really. There were actually several points in the story where the Progeny were seen talking to an unseen Progenitor who was very intrigued by the aspects of the Legion of superheroes. So it wasn't too hard to connect the dots from there. And how did Element Lad wind up in this position? Well, let him tell you for yourself.
Jan greets his old friends, though he admittedly has problems remembering them. See, the Legion have really only lost a little over a year. Element Lad, he lost more like an eon. Jan goes on to explain how the Rift, quite literally, threw the Legion ship outside the known universe. Along the way, he encased the team in suspended animation crystals in order to protect them. He was able to chart a course back into the universe, however, he had to remain on the outside of the ship in order to help it maintain its integrity when re-entering. As the ship re-entered, Jan lost his grip and began floating alone in the universe for 1 billion years. He saw stars, planets, even galaxies be born and die off. Eventually, the loneliness began to get to him. He found a planet that was in the early stages of evolution and decided to help it along. John went on to create the Progeny, the Kawai, the Lorcans, everything that the Legion had encountered up until now. He became a god. Over time, Jan forgot all about the Legion. After all, he was only a Legionnaire for a few years. Compared to a millennia or two, that's like comparing a few seconds to a century. However, as the Progeny returned with tales of the Legion, Jan's memory began to return. Jan then announces that the Legion will soon be returning to Earth. He had the Progeny bring back the interdimensional home of the Omniphagus. He managed to contain the creature, and now they can use the portal to return to Earth. Jan sets about healing the Legionnaire's injuries, including regrowing Livewire's arm.
Livewire lost his arm in a confrontation with his brother Mech, who had similar powers. And since then, Garth had been using a mechanical arm, well, right up until this point.
Left alone to rest up, the Legion begin debating about Element Lad. Umbra, Chameleon, and Brainiac say that Jan needs to be taken down, while Monstrous and Kid Quantum believe he can be reasoned with. Livewire decides that he needs proof about Jan one way or the other. He breaks the team into 3 groups, one to look at the portal and determine if they can actually get through it and home, one to fight the Progeny if Jan moves against them, and one to get into Jan's head and see what his motives truly are. Brainiac, Kid Quantum, and Shikiri scope out the portal. The Progeny are already sending ships through, but the ships are getting lost inside. Brainy points out that the Legion has an advantage. They have a Pathfinder who can chart a course through the portal. Saturn Girl, Chameleon, and Monstrous go to Element Lad. Monstrous pleads with Jan to remember who he was. Jan says he will make the Earth better, like he made this part of the galaxy better. The Omniphagus will go through and destroy everything, and then Jan will remake things. Jan then kills Monstrous.
The final part of our story is told from the perspective of Livewire.
Saturn Girl psychically beams the image of Jan killing Monstrous to the other 2 teams. With that, the Legion begin an attack on the Progeny. Back with Jan, Chameleon begins chomping at the bit, but Saturn Girl reminds him, Legion don't kill. However, this allows Jan to begin attacking the other 2. Eventually, Jan tries converting Chameleon's blood into acid. Saturn Girl blasts Jan with a psychic attack and begins trying to hold him in place. Chameleon relays Jan's plan to Livewire and the others. Eventually, Jan manages to break through Saturn Girl's attack, and it's then that Ultra Boy arrives and punches Jan. Kid, Quantum, and Wildfire arrive, but Jan makes quick work of all three. Unfortunately, all the commotion has freed the Omniphagus. Jan moves to attack the creature, and eventually he begins merging with it. The Legion flee to their spaceship and begin flying towards the portal. Shakiri begins charting a course through the portal to get the Legion home, where they can hopefully destroy the portal on the other side. However, the merged Jan creature is in hot pursuit. Livefire comes up with one last plan. He turns to Ultra Boy and Chameleon and paralyzes them with an electric jolt. He tells Joe to say goodbye to Imra for him, and resigns the team leadership to Chameleon. Garth then leaves the ship and leaps into the Jan creature's mouth. He begins charging up enough electricity that he's able to control the electric impulses inside the creature's brain, which causes the beast to suffer a fatal stroke. The last thing Garth sees is the Legion ship entering the portal and going home.
And so ends Legion Lost. How was it? Well, there were some positive aspects of the comic. It's very new reader friendly. I wouldn't have a problem using this to introduce the Legion of Superheroes to someone. The characters are written very strongly, and it's easy to grasp right away what they do. And with each part of the story being told from a different character's perspective, it is rather unique. Also, the artwork from Olivier Coipel is quite enjoyable. That being said, Olivier Coipel does not do all the artwork in this. They had to bring in a fill-in artist, and he's not nearly as good. Seriously, there's one point where it looks like Livewire has a cauliflower ear for some reason. Also, well, it is unique to tell each chapter of the story from a different character's perspective. A lot of times that whole POV thing kind of gets abandoned halfway through. For example, Monstrous's issue, Ultra Boy's issue, and Umbra's issues really don't add much. And because of that, this comic really feels padded. I think this would have been much, much, much better if this were 8 issues instead of 12. And I know this is a real big nitpick, but again, these characters are supposed to be under the age of 18, and yet both Kid Quantum and Umbra seem to spend much of the comic parading around in thongs. I mean, seriously, their butt cheeks are hanging out like half the time. Again, they're not 18, and you're trying to turn them into sex pots. And like I said, I know that's a real nitpick. But other than that, I can't really say I had that big a problem with most of this book. I really did enjoy it very much. But again, those problems do weigh it down quite a bit, so I am going to give Legion Lost a C. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.